So before we begin this video, I want to give you a little insight into how I use masking fluid. In watercolor painting, we typically do not use white paint. Some people use white acrylic or they use gouache to touch up areas. I prefer not to use white as much as possible, and so I'll use masking fluid to protect areas of the paper, and so I can paint freely over the paper. So this is the masking fluid that I use. It's a Winsor & Newton masking fluid, and I have a number of different ways that I use it. So let's take a look. The first of these obviously is using a brush to apply the masking fluid. I also have a fine liner tool, and then there's a fine line applicator as well that you can buy. The fine line applicator comes in bottles like this with a screw off top and a metal nib that goes into the top of the bottle, so it keeps the bottle from clogging up. This is really good if you're doing very fine line work. It can be a little jagged, but it's pretty good, and I'm going to show you that one in just a moment. So all you will do is you will take your masking fluid and pour it into this fine line applicator bottle. So let's just take a quick look. This is the paper that I use. I always use 100% cotton, and Arches is the paper that I prefer to use, but for illustration purposes I'm going to be using a piece of black paper only because it allows us to be able to see the surface a little better. So let's start off with the fine line applicator, and for this particular tutorial we're going to be doing fireworks, so I just want to show you how I use this applicator. So I will take a small amount and I will pop it in and drag it out like so. And so these areas that you see here will be applied to the paper and therefore protect the paper, so when I can freely paint around it. And you will see in my paintings that are coming up in this tutorial that I will have started with lines very similar to this. So that's a very quick way and easy way to get the effects of fireworks. The next way that I use it is a little more traditional. I will take some of the masking fluid. It can be tricky to open these sometimes. That was pretty easy. And I'll just pour it into a small vessel. A little of this goes a long way, so you don't need a lot. So you can use one of these tools, which is called a liner tool, and essentially you can determine how wide or how narrow you want the spread of masking fluid to be. So it's a little bit like an old fountain pen, if you remember. You load this up here, the masking fluid, onto this, and then you will simply drag like so. And this is really good if you want particularly straight lines. And if you want wider lines, you can just make this wider. Takes a little bit, whoops. Takes a little bit to get it loaded up sometimes. There we go. And then you can continue on. So before you use masking fluid for the first time, I would recommend that you take out a piece of paper and practice. And you can see already over here, this masking fluid is beginning to disappear. That's because it's drying up. And then the most traditional way that people use masking fluid is using a brush. One thing that you really need to be careful of here is if you're going to use masking fluid with a brush, you have to have water. If you dip your brush directly into the masking fluid, you are going to destroy your brush. I know this because I have done this. So be very careful. Make sure you wet your brush the same way, so treat the masking fluid the same way as you would if it was paint. Wet your brush, dip it in the masking fluid, and then start painting. So this I really like because it gives you more control, more gestural movements with the masking fluid. So I like to use a brush. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I have used both the fine liner tool that I've done here, and I'm using the brush. And as you will see in this tutorial, you will see me use both techniques. So there you have it. There's a quick introduction to using masking fluid with 3 different tools: using a brush, using a fine line applicator, and using a liner tool. And I will include links to these in the description of this video. So after you've applied your masking fluid, it's really important that you let the masking fluid dry fully before you start painting on top of your paper. You can use a hairdryer to dry masking fluid, but if you are going to use a hairdryer, use a cold setting. Do not use a warm setting, otherwise you will make the masking fluid much more difficult to actually remove from the paper. And when I've finished applying my masking fluid, I will simply take the small container that I've used and I'll put it back in the bottle, and I can reuse that again. Put that away, and I just let this dry naturally, and when this is dried, it'll just peel straight out of there. So, on with the tutorial.